Hi guys, Emily Craven here. Welcome very much to the Monday blog. Please excuse my very husky voice. I've been quite sick for the past week. I'm still sort of coming out of it, so if I have some very nasally pronunciations, please forgive me. But this week I want to talk about this funny little story that popped up on the internet a couple of weeks ago, and it has so many different lessons for indie authors I'm not sure exactly where to begin. But basically it rolls dealing with bad reviews, the importance of metadata, and the stupidity of only publishing in one format, all into one very tasty sushi roll. So let's pick this situation apart. Imagine thousands of crazed readers who can't wait for the release of an ebook title. And when it finally arrives on Amazon and other retailers, they snap it up. But they snap up the wrong ebook instead. This is what happened late last year when Stephen King released his print-only novel Joyland. Hundreds of ebook reading King fans went immediately to Amazon, and when they searched for the novel Joyland, they mistakenly bought the only other ebook by that name, which was one by a literary fiction author named Emily Schultz, which was put out in 2006. For King, he probably didn't even feel the loss of ebook sales for his print-only book. But for Schultz, a literary fiction novelist from Canada, this was a massive deal. This completely unexpected bump in sales of over 200 books last October brought a massive monetary windfall, but at the same time it came along with a whole heap of negative and rather confused reviews. Not one of King's bests, but I enjoyed it. Simple, predictable, but sweet. I think you'll agree, more a little unfair to cop those sorts of reviews because people couldn't read the name of the author. But Emily did a very bright thing in response to this. Once she got her royalty check, she basically started a Tumblr blog chronicling how she spent Stephen King's royalty money. And in each post, she would ask whether Stephen King would approve of what she had just bought. Some of the items she spent Stephen King's royalty money on included a car bumper which had been mysteriously dented. Would Stephen King approve? Well, according to Emily, of course he would. Cars, mysterious garbage men, feelings of vengeance? How could he not? It's super amusing to read through all of her purchases and her thoughts on King's reaction to them. I highly recommend you read it, and you can find the link to it in the words and stuff below. But the real takeaway from this whole scenario, other than a really good giggle, is how Emily dealt with this scenario. Rather than having a whinge on her blog about how people had given her really bad reviews, she turned it around into a PR opportunity. She gently rebukes the bad reviews by pointing out that the reviewers were after a book written by an entirely different author. She makes fun of her luck and endears people to her personally by chronicling that in public and making fun of it and making it entertaining. I know I have a much deeper connection to her than I think I've ever had to Stephen King. And she conveniently draws attention to it almost 8 months after the mix-up when her new novel is on pre-order. Not to mention she got the personal attention of Stephen King. Indie authors always need to be asking themselves, when crazy things like this happen, when you get bad reviews or bad press, how can I turn this around? How can I turn this around and keep my dignity while at the same time giving the haters the finger? Not that I would ever recommend swearing or rude gestures towards your readers. The story also underscores the power and importance of metadata. Sure, if people had perhaps used their eyes and seen that King's name wasn't on the cover, or perhaps questioned why the name Emily Schultz was on the cover and maybe asked themselves whether Stephen King had a sex change or not, they may not have mistakenly spent their money. But if the metadata had been accurate and rigorous for both these books, this probably wouldn't have happened. For example, Emily Schultz's name is not prominent on her covers, and it should be if she wants to build an author brand. The description on Amazon across her ebooks and her print books are not consistent, which would have only added to the confusion. And after the initial mix-up, the publisher probably should have changed her description to make her name more prominent, or at least note that this was not King's book, but it was as good as King's writing. Indie authors need to make sure they have the best keywords, description, and covers to attach to their work. It will help your work stand out from the crowd and not get confused with someone else's novels. As this scenario very clearly points out, it's all about being consistent with your branding. The final lesson to be learnt from this whole strange and funny story is the stupidity of windowing your work. Windowing is when you release different formats of your book at different times. So when you release the print edition several months before the ebook edition, just like King's publishers did with Joyland. They released the Joyland ebook 10 months after the print book, and in that 10 months they pissed off all the Stephen King fans who read ebooks only. King mentioned that he wanted to release the book as a print-only version because he wanted to honour the pulp books that he was emulating. But all he did was anger and confuse fans and lose almost $3,000 in royalties when people bought Emily's book instead. While the money loss probably wouldn't have bothered someone as big as King, that is a lot of money to be leaving on the table as an indie author. The reason I say this is because we indie authors do that in reverse. We release the ebook months before we ever release a print edition. Just as ebook sales are only a small proportion of sales for King, print book sales are only a small proportion of sales for indie authors. But they are sales. And they can bring in good money no matter what proportion of your sales they are. Readers want to read in the format they prefer. Give yourself the best chance of success by putting all of your formats out simultaneously. Don't give your readers an excuse to read someone else's book when they could be reading yours.